Hello, and welcome to Algebra 2, Lesson 9. Today we are talking about percent word problems. I'm going to show you a couple of different ways to do this so that you can get the answer correct. Let's read this problem. The wood nymphs and maids went to the banquet. If 70% of those present were wood nymphs and 120 maids were present, how many wood nymphs came to the banquet? Now, there's an easy way to do this, but then there's a way that you can kind of understand it a little bit better. So I'm going to show you both. You only have to do one. So in my mind, when I look at this, I see that 70% were wood nymphs. So I'm going to write wood nymphs, 70%. And we have 120 maids. So I have 120 maids. So we know there's 70% wood nymphs. We know there are 120 maids. There's maids and wood nymphs there. So if we have 70% wood nymphs, then we must have 30% maids. They're asking how many wood nymphs came to the banquet. So I think this way is a little bit more challenging, but you can use percent times total equals the part. We can find the total number of people who attended the banquet and then find out how many of those were wood nymphs. Let's try it. So using all of this information, I'm going to plug it in. 30% of the total is 120. So I can solve for the total by dividing by 0.30. Remember, we can change a percent into a decimal by moving the decimal point over 2. So I'm going to divide by 0.3. And that looks like 400 people, or 400, whatever those things are, went to the banquet. Now, they're not asking how many went total, they're asking how many wood nymphs. So I know 70% of the total are wood nymphs. The total is 400. And so 0.7 times 400 is the number of wood nymphs, which just so happens to be 280. You could also just subtract the number of maids from 400. Now, that was a little confusing, so I would encourage you to try it a different way. And anytime you have different groups of people, or more than one, I would make a table. I like the table because then it just makes it a simple cross-multiplying problem. Let's do this. So we have our wood nymphs, we have our maids, and then we have the total. If wood nymphs is 70% and the total is 100%, then maids must be 30%. If there were 120 maids, they want to know how many were wood nymphs. So I'm solving here. This is a little bit easier because all I have to do is 70 divided by 30 is x over 120. So you can make these into ratios or fractions, and then you get x equals 280. Or the number of wood nymphs is 280. So I would highly encourage using the table anytime they give you 2 or more things. It really helps with your percentage problems. Let's look at this next one, and again, we'll try it both ways, and you can choose whichever one makes sense for you. The harvest was plentiful. That sounds like a Bible verse to me. But the workers were few. Yeah, step out. Do something that the Lord is calling you to do. The Bible says the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Anyways, back to it. As it was 120% greater than last year. That's really great. 120% more than we earned last year. If this year yielded 140,800 bushels, how many were harvested last year? So again, we could do it the way that I showed you originally. We'll say this year, and then we have last year. If last year was 100%, right? Because you harvested 100% of what you harvested last year, so that's the whole thing. This year was 120% greater. And this is where, if you do it this way, students tend to get confused. If it's 120% greater, this year is now 220%. It's 100% plus 120. Now we can do percent times total, where total is that last year 100% equals the part, which is 140,800. And we can solve this. So 220% times the total is 140,800. We'll divide by 2.2, moving that decimal place over 2. And we get 64,000 bushels. Now, again, that seems a little confusing to me. So instead of doing that, I would make a table. We have last year and this year. Last year, we had 100% of what we had. That makes sense because there's just all that we had. And now we have 120 greater. So some people even like to do change. So we increase by 120%. And so this year, we have 100 plus 120, which is 220. That's where I got that 220 number from. So if that helps you, write it out that way. Now, this year we know we have 140,800, and they're asking us how many were harvested last year. So we're solving for this number. Sometimes they'll ask you to solve for the change. And so setting up the table really helps you. Now I'm going to take this row and this row. So I have 100 divided by 220 is x over 140,800. From there, you can cross multiply and solve. I would highly recommend that. So go out, serve the Lord in some amazing way, and draw the table. It'll save your life one day. Maybe not.